So today on Spacepod, we take a research view, and along with my IBM colleague Paul Gatman, it's our great pleasure to have with us Susan Clarke, Research Director for Smart Buildings at Verdantix. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, good morning, Paul.
So we need to say before we get started, not an official place for any strategy from either company. It is just our personal points of view coming together. So with our focus on space, Susan, and what that means, I'd love to learn a little bit about you, your role at Verdantix.
Thank you very much. So just as a short introduction to myself, I lead the Smart Building Research Division at Verdantix, and we're a team of research analysts publishing research on technologies to optimize the performance of buildings. And that really runs the gambits from anything from room booking software right through to technology more at the cutting edge, whether that's IoT platforms and digital twins for buildings. And actually what's quite interesting is at Verdantix, we also have a separate research group focused entirely on technology for health and safety management. And what's really interesting is right now, and we may get into a bit more in today's session, is that there is huge convergence between the smart building and safety agenda. And for the first time, the office is moving from something that is relatively low risk to being something that is high risk during the pandemic. And I've been covering the building technology sector as an analyst for nearly 10 years. And I'm particularly interested in the intersection of sustainability and real estate.
Susan, you just mentioned the shift of buildings from being a low risk area of focus and maybe moving higher up the risk register. I'd love to get a little bit more insight on that point.
At Verdantix, we've been looking at how firms are putting together their return to work strategies. And what we've seen is within that, for the first time, the facility manager is really on the front line of ensuring workplace safety. And the stakes have really been raised. It's no longer worrying about some hazards in the building, such as someone tripping. Stakes have really been raised, and facility managers are now thinking about the best way to ensure infection control in the building. And actually, I think facility managers, this is a really good opportunity for them to be getting much closer to their health and safety colleagues. Kind of in the health and safety sector, there's some very well-used frameworks around controlling risks and hazards. And I think it's a good opportunity for facility managers and environment health and safety managers to be working much more closely right now.
Susan, as you talk to customers and the wider industry, do you have any examples? You don't have to mention anyone, of course, but is there anything you're seeing that's different that we talked about 3 months ago, or is it just business as usual?
When I've been speaking to facility managers, I've actually been hearing from them that they have been initially tackling lots of non-technology projects. So when I speak to a facility manager around what have they done to date around preparing their workplace staff returning, it has been some quite basic initiatives. So removing soft furnishing to reduce staff congestion, closing certain entrances to a building which they see to be too narrow, or even adding physical markings to the floor. And certainly a lot of the public response to COVID has also centered around some of the basics. It's been a strategy based on soap, face masks and gloves in many ways. That really has, I think, been the focus to date. I would actually say it has changed in the past few weeks, and we are seeing some facility managers and workplace managers within our network start to really look at what is the role for technology. And generally, I've seen firms look at quite narrow and targeted implementations of technology, all centered around occupant safety. So I'm aware of airports installing sensors to calculate social distancing levels. I'm aware that some distribution centres have been testing the role for wearable sensors, again for social distancing, alert and contact tracing.
Thank you, Susan. Have you got any return to work stories you can share, as a result of COVID-19?
I think in some cases, COVID has definitely accelerated some technology deployments. I mean, there's a consulting firm I know of that has gone from piloting space utilization sensors across one building, taking it to 100 buildings in one go. And that's obviously a much faster speed than we would typically see. And then actually another area of kind of software implementation that we've also been seeing a bit more of a hive of activity around is a visitor management system. You're kind of all familiar with visitor visitor management systems. It's a very mature category of software that essentially helps a firm to keep a digital record of who is in your building. What we've seen over the past few weeks is that some firms are looking to implement or upgrade their visitor management system, and this is all around improving their process for recording visitors in the case of needing to run contact tracing in the future. And actually, in some regions, we've actually seen new regulation come out requiring workplaces to start capturing data on all visitors and employees attending a workplace.
And what about regulations for building managers and FM directors to think about?
We've seen regulation both from New Zealand and Singapore requiring firms to start creating a digital log of employees entering and exiting a workplace. To summarise that, we have seen facility managers using lots of kind of non-technology initiatives alongside some very targeted implementations of IoT and other software categories.
We're getting clearer business cases, even like mini business cases of why we need software to manage this, because you're right, we're doing a lot of physical manual things to kind of get going, but as we mature through this, we are going to need to have some level of automation or some sort of digital oversight. So the role of software probably will change, and I do wonder about some of the architectures of the software that we are using in this industry, whether over time, whether that will begin to change. And there's somewhere in the back of my mind the role of the mobile. That's when I think about going into work and my mobile's with me, is my mobile now going to be more of a buddy for me to say, look, this train is safe, this bus is okay, the office is okay, or it's not. And it's my phone that's actually communicating to those assets to tell me this. And so therefore the software on my phone might become the thing as well in the future. Do you think now the industry is speeding up in the digital twin world because of what's happening in this return to work? Or again, is it slightly separate at the moment and hasn't kind of caught up?
One thing that really struck me during the COVID lockdown is that it really highlighted that facility managers very often do not have the tools in place to manage their buildings during a crisis, and particularly a lockdown. Buildings are often still very reliant on on-site personnel, and I've spoken to many facility managers that have told me they were struggling with manual building systems that weren't connected to the internet, and that approach is really not fit for a crisis, and particularly a lockdown. And I'm sure, Paul, you've seen some of those photos on Twitter showing kind of big buildings that have simply left their lights on during the lockdown period. That just really highlights the fact that at present, buildings are still very reliant on on-site personnel for their continual management and optimization. So I think if we take a step back from that situation, COVID, I think, will really strengthen the case for all technologies that help you to remotely manage your building. And that will also include a building digital twin. I think for me, the question still remains around how sophisticated your remote twin really needs to be. Could you get most of the value from a remote dashboard showing you your facility's operational data? Or do you need a comprehensive 3D replica of all your buildings and assets? So for me, there's still a question there, but I think what is clear is that the building sector does need new tools to help them better manage their buildings remotely and when they're not on site.
So Susan, I did a bit of research before the podcast, and you recently spoke to the BBC about changing shape of hot desking post-COVID and the steps organisations are going through as part of the return to work plans and the knock-on effects to the overall workplace experience.
It's actually fascinating, Paul, and we've been very much trying to dig into the details with our research. Kind of where I've got to is I really see COVID and the whole crisis situation as more of a catalyst to accelerate trends that were already in place. So we were seeing already before COVID a push towards hot desking, a push towards a bit more remote working, and a push behind space rationalisation. What has changed since COVID is I think we'll see much faster development across all of these areas. And actually, I'd like to dig into a few of these a little bit more. Starting with hot desking, I mean, I've heard a lot of people speculate whether COVID will spell the end for hot desking. Certainly, there are worries there about kind of what is the hygiene level if someone is sharing a desk. But actually, I'm anticipating hot desking will accelerate over the long term. And that's because the incentive for hot desking is very much a financial one. And firms have been using hot desking in the past to reduce their space requirements by 20%. I do expect we'll see hot desking continue, but it will need to be managed quite differently than it has been in the past, with a greater emphasis on pre-booking spaces. I know a lot of firms would previously manage their hot desking kind of first come, first serve, but I also think kind of a big change in the sector is going to be around space utilization and space rationalization. I'm sure we've all seen the announcements from the technology and consulting sectors about how much office space they're planning to get rid of. But this is actually a continuation of an existing trend. Even before the current COVID crisis and recession, we saw firms trimming their portfolios because real estate is very expensive. But I think today we are going to see this trend continue and accelerate, and certainly firms are going to be using the opportunity of remote working to really raise their ambitions for space rationalization. Before COVID, we often saw firms target a 20% reduction in their office footprint by making workplaces denser and more agile. But today, firms are really raising their ambitions, and I'm expecting more firms to use home working to reduce their footprint by 50%.
You know, other people on the podcast, and particularly Mike Geddy from CBRE, who talked about, you know, a number of great things. He talked about kind of autonomous workplace, fluid workspaces, and this kind of shift to more neighborhood community office space versus, you know, traveling traditionally on public transport into a city like London or Manchester or Edinburgh. And, you know, this blend of home working and, you know, whilst we don't know the answer, and, you know, this will no doubt evolve over many, many years, you know, as you talk to industry leaders, they're all fighting this challenge about what do I do about protecting the real estate and all the costs and everything I've got, but at the same time, deal with the human need to be safe, but at the same time, meet people and collaborate and collide with colleagues, because we can't live in this thumbnail world that most of us have been in for 3 months. Or can we? I mean, you know, I say we can't, but there was a time where we didn't have to wear a seatbelt.
Certainly from what I've seen, it seems that almost every strategy is on the table right now. I've heard from a London-based law firm, it's planning to let all of its employees to work from home permanently, and it will have a single office for exactly what you were talking about, Paul, for an opportunity to have a collaboration hub to kind of encourage collisions between employees, and also to have a great space for meeting clients. So that's certainly kind of one new operating model that I've heard firms are looking at. And I've also heard from firms, exactly as you said, Paul, they're thinking about whether they can localize their office footprint with more flexible workspaces that can be used from staff that may be based out of town and that may need to come together occasionally to work on specific projects. So certainly it does seem as though a lot is sitting on the table right now, and we're really seeing quite a scattergun of approaches that firms are considering. I think the one trend that we will see with us for the long term is much more home working. And I think there's a kind of a big realization right across different firms that the office should not just be a place that people come into to start firing off email. We can do that from home. And I think it's a really interesting time. People are starting to rethink kind of what is the purpose of the office. And it could be a great opportunity for the sector, for the office to potentially raise its importance within an organization. It's not just a place that you pay for to kind of hold a series of desks. It's actually a much more strategic and important place that is your collaboration hub and inspires new connections and much more collaboration. So it certainly is a really interesting time. There certainly are huge implications whether you're a head of real estate right now or a facility manager. As a head of real estate in the future, you may be making very different decisions around what space to take on. Previously, firms would often size their office space requirements around how many desks they wanted sitting in that space. But going forward, you may be looking for something very different. It may no longer just be a place for putting desks in, but actually, what is the best location I can have to bring my staff together effectively? And it's actually already interesting that the role of the facility manager has to date often been very focused on what's happening at the building level. How can I make sure that my staff and employees are safe while using the building, but also they're having a great workplace experience? And actually, I think going forward, the remit of the facility manager is going to become a bit broader, as the definition of work really extends from the workplace into the virtual world. And it was actually interesting, I was on LinkedIn yesterday, and I noticed that a facility manager at a large social media company had changed their job title from head of facilities management to head of facilities and remote working experience. So I think there's already a clue in there that kind of the workplace really is changing, and we should be thinking about people's home offices within that definition.
To one off the record type chat with someone for a bank, and he said, look, at the very top of the business, they've looked at what's gone on and they've decided that it actually does not matter where anybody sits, because their product hasn't changed, whether people are sitting in their buildings or not. And so they went from that point. And he said, I think my job will change. And I think what I'll end up doing is, as you've said, I'll probably manage the HQ and maybe a couple of, regional geographic offices, maybe. He said, but my new role will be to almost become like an Airbnb for office space across my business. It's thinking that's going on right now. And I'm fascinated about that, because again, for us, the role of software, the role of technology will change dramatically if this happens, because you don't need software to manage, you don't need software like IWMS to manage that scenario. You still need it for the building, the HQ, but there's only one building now. I don't know. It's amazing, isn't it? It's going to be really, it's going to be a real clear out, I think, of ideas, and some will fail and some will succeed, no doubt.
Fascinating. And you can totally see why that situation could work if you have a group of colleagues that's kind of based outside of London, let's say, and they're spending an hour and a half commuting in and out each day. Would it not be better for the company, better for their own experience, that they're able to cluster together and maybe only come into the HQ once a week? So yeah, I think certainly it is a bit of a time for people to step back and really reassess kind of has the normal been working for us, and kind of what best practices from lockdown can we start baking in to the new normal going forward.
So Susan, too often we talk as an industry in theoretical and abstract ways. So can I ask you to give like a more of a personal view on the 30, 60, 90-day type of planning you see real estate and facility owners undertaking as part of their return to work strategy?
The first 30 days has really been focused on quite a few basic initiatives, lots of non-technology things happening, whether that's physical markers on the floor, closing down certain entrances if they look like they're too narrow. And then the next focus that we have seen, and this is what I would really encourage firms to do, is look at quick to roll out technology solutions that solve specific problems. So we do see a really strong role for mobile apps in the workplace to aid the safe return to work. Mobile apps can often be quite cost effective, and they're often very easy to roll out. So we've seen firms using mobile apps to encourage the safe booking of workplaces. We've also seen firms looking at the role of mobile apps to aid a more contactless experience of the building. So leveraging some of the Bluetooth technology that's already baked into most phones. So I think that's been a lot of the near-term initiatives that we've seen firms launching. But in terms of going forward, actually, we do think it is a time that, as a head of real estate or head of facilities management, it's a really important time to be rethinking the role of the workplace, and how should the workplace evolve to empower new business models. So if your organisation is looking to roll out more home working, what should the new role of the workplace be? And we would really encourage facility managers, heads of real estate to really try and stake out a thought leadership role at their organisation, to really be at the forefront of that, to be kind of saying, we think the physical office should do this, and it should be very much kind of intertwined with the digital workplace as well. So that's kind of the focus that I would suggest going forward.
But Susan, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Paul, it's been a pleasure to have Susan on Spacepod. I'm sure there's much we can take forward. So thank you, Susan.
To the listeners, if you liked what you heard, then please tell others. You've been listening to Spacepod. Please stay safe.